Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for everyone to join this webinar today, hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. My name is Jasleen Kaur, and I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Today's webinar will be on the topic of Khalsa Scholars and Martyrs, specifically by Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh. I'm more than honored to introduce our guest speaker for today, Santavir Singh, who is an avid student of Sikhi. He has spoken at many retreats, conferences, youth camps for over 2 decades. He's also been trying to cultivate a deeper relationship with Shabad Guru while focusing on Sikh inspirations through social activism, feminism, and human rights. He was born in Vancouver and completed his bachelor's degree at McGill University and currently resides in Toronto with his 2 wonderful children and an amazing wife. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor on to Santavir Singh. Take it away.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's really wonderful being here today. Thank you for the opportunity. We are going to be exploring the lives of 2 really incredible Gursikhs. Sikhs that a lot of us may have grown up with their images. They're quite famous. They're very popular. A lot of things about them are quite well known, actually, especially their Shahidi, both by Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh. But we're going to try to go into the weeds a little bit, going to explore a little bit more about their lives, and also see the similarities, what makes them and what made them such important figures for 18th century Sikh life. Because both these people were really important in the time that they lived. So without further ado, we'll start the presentation. And we got the wrong slides here. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, there you go. So we're going to be looking at the lives of Baba Deep Singh and Bhai Mani Singh. Now, the main commonalities between both of these figures is that they have a very close personal connection to Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. So they lived with Guru Gobind Singh Ji in Anandpur. They interacted with Guru Gobind Singh Ji for most of their lives when Guru Gobind Singh Ji was alive, and they played a really important role in most of the major events that happened in Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Guruship. So they were really fundamental factors in the Sikh life around Guru Gobind Singh Ji in the time that they were alive. Both of them also have a very special and important, intense connection with Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So both by Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh, and we'll explore what that connection is a little bit later, but they both have a very close connection with Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And it would not be an understatement to say that really the fact that Guru Granth Sahib Ji, that we have it today, is a lot due to the efforts of early Sikhs like Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh, who kept Guru Granth Sahib Ji safe, who transmitted the knowledge and the scripture over the generations through some very difficult times in Sikh history. And like I said before, both of them also played an integral role in 18th century Sikh life. So from the Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji's Jyoti Jyot was in 1708, and that is when Guru Granth Sahib Ji was given Gurgaddi. And from that point onwards, the Khalsa Panth and the Guru Granth Sahib Ji were the Guru of the Sikhs, as they are today. And in that post-Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji time period, Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh both played very important roles, a little bit different roles, but very important roles, and we're going to explore those. And of course, finally, the last commonality that they both have is their Shahidi, that both of them gave their lives in such a dramatic fashion, such an important way, such a way that has been remembered and commemorated and eulogized throughout the last 300 years, that Sikhs have remembered their Shahidi, have spoken of their Shahidi often, have been inspired by their Shahidi. So both of these figures gave Shahidi in a very dramatic way, and their Shahidi has been a constant inspiration for the Sikh Panth over the last 300 years. Let's start off with looking at Bhai Mani Singh. So there's a little bit of confusion around Bhai Mani Singh because there are multiple people with similar names at the same time. But according to modern scholars, the consensus is that Bhai Mani Singh was born in 1644. This makes Bhai Mani Singh about 22 years older than Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. He was one of 12 siblings, and we'll talk about his family in a minute because his family is very exemplary and very famous in Sikh history, and rightly so. He was married to Bibi Sito, and Bibi Sito, an incredible woman in and of herself, who also gave Shahidi along with Bhai Mani Singh. She was the daughter of Bhai Lakhi Shah Labana, Bhai Lakhi Shah Vanjara. Bhai Lakhi Shah, of course, is the one who destroyed his own house in order to give a proper sanskar to the body of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji after Guru Sahib Ji Shahidi in Delhi in 1675. Bhai Mani Singh had 10 children. He fought in his younger years, he fought in many battles of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, including in Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji's first battle, the Battle of Pangani, the very famous battle where Pir Buddhu Shah came and helped Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. He was appointed the Darbari Diwan of Guru Gobind Singh Ji in 1691. So Darbari Diwan is an interesting position. We sometimes forget, or we sometimes minimize, or we don't talk about enough this idea that the Gurus were sovereign, that the Gurus were sovereign Shahenshah, Badshah. And as a Shahenshah, they had a Darbar. So when we use the term Darbar, this is a very political term. It's a term that we use to refer to the court of a king or a queen. And in Guru Gobind Singh Ji's court, there were ministers. And the head minister, the prime minister, you can say, the Darbari Diwan, Diwan means minister, Darbar meaning the court. So the head minister was Bhai Mani Singh. And he was appointed the Darbari Diwan in 1691. So Bhai Mani Singh would be responsible for when people would come to visit Guru Gobind Singh Ji, when ambassadors would come, when representatives would come from the Mughal government or from the Pahari Raje, when other people would come just for the day-to-day logistics of running a darbar. Bhai Mani Singh was in charge of that. And interestingly, just as an aside, before Bhai Mani Singh, Mata Gujri fulfilled that role in Guru Gobind Singh Ji's darbar when Guru Gobind Singh Ji was a child. Bhai Mani Singh received Amrit in 1699 at Vaisakhi. He was in the third batch of people to receive Amrit. So he was right there at the very beginning of the Khalsa Panth. After the events of 1702, 1703, where Guru Sahib Ji and the Sikhs were separated, and the Chote Sahibzade were Shahid, and the Vadde Sahibzade were Shahid at Chamkaur Sahib, all those events that took place, Guru Gobind Singh Ji met up again with Bhai Mani Singh at Saboki Talwandi, which we now call Damdama Sahib, in 1705. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. In 1722, he united the Panth. This is a really awesome story, just a really interesting story from Sikh history. And in this story, it's the Bandai Khalsa, the Sikhs who believed that Banda Singh Bahadur should be the 11th Guru. This happened after Baba Banda Singh Bahadur Shahidi. And the rest of the Khalsa, which was called the Tat Khalsa, and there was a ladai, there was a fight between these two groups. And Bhai Mani Singh was in charge of settling this fight and bringing unity to the Panth. And in 1723, along with Bhai Kirpal Singh, Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Mama Ji, on the orders of Mata Sundari and Mata Sahib Kaur, Bhai Mani Singh organized the very first Sarbat Khalsa. So the very first Sarbat Khalsa in Sikh history happened in 1723. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And then finally, at the age of 90, so just a lifetime spent in Seva of Guru Sahib, a long life spent in Seva of the Guru. At the age of 90 in 1735, he gave his Shahidi. So one of the things that Bhai Mani Singh is most famous for, one of the things that he's most remarked on for is this incredible lineage. So in the middle here, we have an image of Bhai Lakhi Shah, his father-in-law, who burnt down his house for Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji's body sanskar. On the right, we have an image of one of Bhai Mani Singh's son, the famous Bhai Bachittar Singh, who defeated the elephant at Anandpur in 1702. On the left, you have Bhai Mani Singh's older brother, Bhai Dayala or Bhai Dayal Das, who was Shaheed along with Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji at Delhi in 1675 by being boiled alive. And on the bottom left, we have the Sikhs who were captured with Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, the members of the Khalsa army, who were executed at the Lal Qilla at a rate of 200 per day for a few weeks. And in that group of Sikhs, there were many nephews and children and cousins of Bhai Mani Singh. So stretching back through Sikh history all the way to the time actually of Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, Bhai Mani Singh's family had a major impact on Sikhi and an impact of Qurbani, an impact of sacrifice for the Sikh Panth. In fact, Bhai Mani Singh's Dada Ji, Bhai Ballu, was the very first Sikh to die in battle in the army of Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji. He was Shaheed in the first battle of Amritsar that Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji fought on the grounds of what today is Khalsa College. And that very first battle of Sikh history, the night before the battle, the day before the battle, Bhai Ballu was part of the small group of Sikhs who stopped the Mughal army's advance and held them off so that the rest of the Sikh army could regroup. So from a Dada who gave Shahidi for Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji to an older brother who gave Shahidi for Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji, to himself who gave Shahidi in the 1730s, to children who gave Shahidi at Chamkaur Sahib with Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, and all of these various places in Sikh history, this family gave an incredible amount of Shahidi, a really remarkable amount that Sikh history has managed to uphold. So I have just included an image here, a couple of images. It's actually one page. I just split it into two, of all of the names of the people in Bhai Ballu's family, in Bhai Mani Singh's family, that gave Shahidi for the Sikh Panth. And you can see that some of them fought for Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, some of them got Shaheed at Amritsar or Lahore, some of them got Shaheed with Bhai Mani Singh, some of them were Shaheed with the Chali Mukte, some of them were Shaheed, not the Chali Mukte, at Chamkaur Sahib, some of them were Shaheed at Muksar Sahib. So all of these different instances, very important instances in Sikh history, we have Bhai Mani Singh's family giving Qurbani in all of these instances. So altogether, Sikh history records 56 members of one family who gave Shahidi for the Sikh Panth. And we don't need to go into this in too much detail. I just added this here for information's sake because I thought it looked interesting. But we can see here Bhai Ballu's family, and from Bhai Ballu we can see his children and Bhai Ballu's brothers. Now, unfortunately, much of Sikh history is very male-focused. the stories of women are often lost and ignored. And we can see that happening in these stories as well, in these genealogies that we have of Bhai Mani Singh's family, that the women are totally erased from these stories. So I can't tell you what role the sisters and mothers and wives of these figures played, but I know they played an important role in the Panth at that time. And moreover, we know for sure that some figures like Bhai Mani Singh's wife, Bibi Sito, who later became Bibi Basant Kaur after she received Amrit, she gave Shahidi as well. So we know that some of these figures even gave Shahidi, some of these women. But unfortunately, their information has not been maintained. Only the male children's information was kept. This is by Maidas's genealogy, and by Maidas is by Mani Singh's brother. You can see that Bhai Mani Singh is the third oldest. His older brother are Jetha Singh and Dayal Das, by Dayala, who got Shaheed with Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib Ji. You can see that there are various members of the family that they themselves had important genealogies that gave Shaheed before the Panth. And finally, we can see here Bhai Mani Singh's genealogy, and these are his male children. And we can see Bhai Bachittar Singh is his second oldest child, by Uday Singh, who was Shaheed with Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji, fighting with Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji at the battles right before Chamkaur Sahib, along with Bhai Bachittar Singh. They were Shaheed at that time. Many of these Sikhs were Shaheed around that time, but from Bhai Mani Singh's family. So Ajab Singh, Anak Singh, Ajaib Singh, all of these figures gave their Shahidi for the Sikh Panth. They were all children of Bhai Mani Singh. So we can see that almost all of Bhai Mani Singh's children gave their Shahidi for the Sikh Panth. If we turn away from the lineage and we go to what perhaps Bhai Mani Singh is most well known for, is that he was a scribe for Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. He was a scholar. Sometimes his name is included in the 52 poets of Anandpur Sahib. Sometimes his name is separate from those 52 poets, but he was a scholar who was intensely focused on Gurmat. And he also acted as Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji's personal scribe. And in that role, he played a very important role in Sikh history by scribing the final edition, the final copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. The copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji that was given Gurgaddi at Hazur Sahib in 1708. This copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji was written in 1705 at Damdama Sahib by Mani Singh and Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And it was then taken with Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji when he traveled to the south. And Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji matha tek in front of this sarup of Guru Granth Sahib Ji and gave it Gurgaddi. Unfortunately, the Damdami Bir, as we call it, the Damdami sarup, was destroyed later by the Afghanis in the Vardaka Lukara. So we do not have the original copy that Bhai Mani Singh worked on, but we do have copies of the copy, and actually those were made by the second figure we're going to be looking at today, which is Baba Deep Singh. So we do have copies of the original, but we don't have the original. Bhai Mani Singh also played a really important role in the compilation of what we today call Dasam Granth or Dasam Bani. Dasam Pasha Ki Granth is how it used to be referred to. This is an old copy of Dasam Pasha Ki Granth. And Bhai Mani Singh is said to be the person who collected Guru Gobind Singh Ji's writing and put them together into a Granth in the post-Guru Gobind Singh Ji time period. There is a Sarup of Dasam Granth in Delhi called the Bhai Mani Singh Bir. It is from 1711. So just 3 years after Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji, Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji's Jyoti Jyot. And that Sarup of a Dasam Granth is considered to be the oldest copy of Dasam Granth. It's in a private collection of a family in Delhi. And I think it's Pratap Singh is the name of the collection, the original person who had the Granth. I think Pratap Singh is dead now, but it's in his collection. And that was by Mani Singh's, one of his big sevas to the Sikh Panth was collecting Guru Gobind Singh Ji's writing. Bhai Mani Singh also was a scholar in his own right. So he wasn't just collecting Guru Gobind Singh Ji's writing. He wasn't just scribing Guru Granth Sahib Ji. There are two works of literature that are ascribed to him. These are popularly said to be ascribed to him. We don't know how much over the years these have been changed, because we don't have the original copies. We have some very old manuscripts, but back then, of course, when people wrote manuscripts, they would make additions and they would add their own sort of interpretation into the manuscript often. That was a common problem in India, in South Asia, with manuscript with copying of manuscripts, manuscript copying. So we can't say for certain which parts of these texts are his, but there are two texts that are associated with Bhai Mani Singh. The first is a Puratan Janam Sakhi. So there's 4 Janam Sakhi traditions. By scholars, they're considered to be 4 Janam Sakhi traditions. And out of the 4, the one that's considered to be most panthic and most well-respected by the Panth is the Bhai Mani Singh Puratan Janam Sakhi. And then we have another text called Sikhs di Bhagat Mala. It's an awesome text. It's easily, you can find it easily on the internet, or you can buy it at any Sikh bookstore. And it goes through, many of you might know that there is a list of Sikhs in Bhai Gurdas Ji's 11th Vad. So in Bhai Gurdas Ji's 11th Vad, he lists the Sikhs of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, Guru Angad Sahib Ji, and so on, all the way up to Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji. And what Bhai Mani Singh does is that he lists off the same Sikhs and tells you a Sakhi for each one of them and why they were listed by Bhai Gurdas Ji. So it is said that Sikhs di Bhagat Mala is a steek or an explanation of the 11th Vad of Bhai Gurdas Ji, and the Puratan Janam Sakhi is a steek or explanation of the first Vad of Bhai Gurdas Ji, which is the Vad that talks about Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, of course. So the Sarbat Khalsa is, I'm currently doing my master's degree actually, and one of my focuses of interest is on the Sarbat Khalsa. The Sarbat Khalsa is just an amazing invention of the Khalsa Panth in the 18th century. This incredible way to make decisions in an egalitarian, equal fashion, where every voice was heard through consensus democracy. And if you look into the history, it turns out that the Sarbat Khalsa was actually invented by Mata Sahib Deva Kaur and Mata Sundari. That these two women, they sent Bhai Mani Singh and Bhai Kirpal Singh to Amritsar Sahib and told them to organize the first Sarbat Khalsa in 1723. This appears in Bansavali Nama of Kesar Singh Chibbar. He documents this episode, and he was an eyewitness to the first Sarbat Khalsa as a child. So the Sarbat Khalsa, as a institution, was invented by these two amazing women, the mother of the Khalsa and Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji's widow, and they were led by Mani Singh. And when I say led, much like in the British or Canadian system, we have a speaker in the parliament, and the speaker is in charge of the debate and makes sure that the debate happens respectfully and kindly, and people are not rude to each other. In the same way, Bhai Mani Singh was in charge of the Sarbat Khalsa, making sure that the different Jathedars representing the different Jathas of the Khalsa Panth did not speak out of line, that they stayed in Gurmat, that they did not fray from Gurmat thinking. So he was really there to keep things in check, keep things in control. And that position we now call the Jathedar of Akal Takat. Now, the phrase Jathedar of Akal Takat is a little bit of a complicated one that really comes about much later in Sikh history. But we can say that essentially that role was fulfilled by Bhai Mani Singh. And finally, of course, Bhai Mani Singh's Shahidi, which happened in 1735. Bhai Mani Singh was in charge of Darbar Sahib. He was a Granthi at Harmandir Sahib and the Mukh Sehwadar of Akal Takat Sahib. And Sarbat Khalsa would happen twice a year, about 6 months apart. Excuse me. And the Sarbat Khalsa would happen at Vaisakhi and Diwali. And those were two important days that had been important in the Sikh Panth since the time of Guru Amar Das Sahib Ji. So Guru Amar Das Sahib Ji had put those days aside and said, these are days that everyone else is celebrating. These are days that Sikhs need to come together and celebrate and join together, have sangat of each other, and have darshan of the Guru. And those days were then transformed into the Sarbat Khalsa days by Mani Singh. So every Vaisakhi and every Diwali, the Khalsa Panth would join together and they would have a meeting at Akal Takat Sahib. The Mughal governor, of Lahore, stopped Bhai Mani Singh from holding the Diwali festival in 1735, and instead arrested Bhai Mani Singh. Also arrested 22 of his students and his wife, Mata Sitoji. So they were all taken to Lahore. And at Lahore, they were all brutally killed one by one. Some of them were cut joint by joint from their hands, their elbows, their shoulders, their feet, their ankles, their knees, their groin, and if they were still alive, then their heads. Some of them were skinned alive, where their skin was pulled off of their bodies while they were alive. So 12 students of Bhai Mani Singh were skinned alive. 10 students were cut band kataige. And I want us to imagine the scene. There is old Bhai Mani Singh. His wife of many decades has just been shaheed there in front of him as well. Some of his sons have been shaheed there along with him. I believe 2 of his sons were shaheed with him. There is blood everywhere. It is a gruesome scene. And Bhai Mani Singh is sitting there, and he's brought up to the executioner's block, and it is now his turn to be band katai. And we remember this moment, we commemorate this moment so much in Sikh history because of how important it is, because of what it says about Bhai Mani Singh, what it demonstrates about Bhai Mani Singh. As the executioner is about to cut off Bhai Mani Singh's wrist, Bhai Mani Singh points at his fingertip and said, "No, start there." I want you to ask yourselves in that moment, who was in charge of that situation? Was Bhai Mani Singh a prisoner, or was he a royal son of Guru Gobind Singh Ji who was keeping his Shahi alive? That even amidst Shahidi, he had his nobility and he refused to be bent. He was showing the executioner, no, I am in charge of this situation. I am the one who is sovereign in the situation, not you. And the amazing thing is that Bhai Mani Singh's hand is steady. But when Bhai Mani Singh says that, it's the executioner whose hand starts shaking because he's so astounded. This is a guy who kills people for a living. And today alone, he's killed 23 other people. And now he's about to kill this old man, this 90-year-old man, and he is shaking because Bhai Mani Singh has demonstrated the sovereignty of the Sikh spirit. And that is why we remember Bhai Mani Singh Shahidi every day in Ardas, because of how remarkable it was, because of what it says about what a Shaheed really is, the spirit of a Shaheed. It is someone who willingly gives up their life to the Guru. Remember that Shaheed and martyr have the same etymology, the etymology meaning witness, that they are a witness to their love for the Guru. So Bhai Mani Singh was demonstrating his love for the Guru by showing how little this physical body meant to him, and all that mattered to him was his inner connection to the divine, that they could do anything to his body, it did not matter. And that is why Bhai Mani Singh Shahidi is so important in Sikh Ityas. Let's turn now to Baba Deep Singh Ji. Baba Deep Singh, I don't know if you remember, Bhai Mani Singh was born about 22 years before Guru Gobind Singh Ji. Baba Deep Singh's born about 20 years after Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. He is born in 1682. So there's about a 40-year age difference between Baba Deep Singh and Bhai Mani Singh. Unlike Bhai Mani Singh, he's an only child. He comes to Anandpur Sahib and he does kirtan with his mother at Anandpur Sahib in Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Diwan. So Baba Deep Singh was first famous for being a kirtani as a teenager when his name was still Deepa. And as his parents were leaving Anandpur Sahib, Guru Gobind Singh Ji said, no, you need to leave you need to leave Deepa with me. He needs to stay here at Anandpur Sahib. And so Deepa stayed at Anandpur Sahib, and for 8 years he learned under Bhai Mani Singh. So Bhai Mani Singh was Baba Deep Singh's ustad. He received Amrit in 1699 as well as a teenager. He was married in 1702. He never had any children. And like Bhai Mani Singh, he met Guru Gobind Singh Ji at Sabo Ki Talwandi in 1705 when Guru Gobind Singh Ji made the final copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. After Guru Gobind Singh Ji left Sabo Ki Talwandi, he put Baba Deep Singh in charge there of the Taksal, or the school that Guru Sahib Ji had founded there. In 1709, so Baba Deep Singh would spend his time at Damdama Sahib teaching, educating, and writing manuscripts. And then periodically he would come and join panthic struggles. So when Baba Banda Singh Bahadur came to Punjab, Baba Deep Singh joined up and he fought under Baba Banda Singh Bahadur. And he fought actually at the very important battle of Chapparchiri when Baba Banda Singh Bahadur defeated Wazir Khan and took over Sirhind. One of the most epic and important battles in all of Sikh history. So Baba Deep Singh fought at that battle. At that time, he was known as Bhai Deep Singh. In 1733, he was made head of one of the 5 Jathas of the Tarnadal. In 1748, he was made one of the head of the 11 missiles, the Shahida missile. And he fought in the Shota Kalukara in 1755, and he survived the Shota Kalukara. And then he got Shaheed liberating the Bar Sahib complex in 1757. So this is a copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji written by Baba Deep Singh. Baba Deep Singh made, apparently according to Sikh tradition, 5 copies of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And one of the copies was in Arabic, and he sent it to the Sikh Sangat that was still there at that time in Baghdad. That's what it says according to Sikh history. I haven't found any evidence of this in modern history. There's no record of that Arabic surup in anywhere else in history, but this is something that's often said about Baba Deep Singh. We have some of the surups that Baba Deep Singh, in fact, compiled, and this is one of them. So this is the Sarup of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. So Baba Deep Singh spent a lot of his time making Sarups of the original copy of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Baba Deep Singh was, like Bhai Mani Singh before him, he was a teacher. So Bhai Mani Singh, when he was at Amritsar, he would travel around the villages around Amritsar and he would teach people Sikhi. He would do Katha and Vichar. In the same way, Baba Deep Singh would do Katha and Vichar and teach Gurmukhi, but also teach Shastra Vidya. So both of them went hand in hand. Like Bhai Mani Singh, he was trained as a warrior, and he so would teach people how to be a scholar and a warrior. And his main pupil was someone named Baba Gurbakh Singh Nahang, who was famously Shahid defending Akal Takht Sahib about 10 years after Baba Deep Singh. And he was actually a nephew of Bhai Mani Singh's. So part of the Bhai Mani Singh family, Baba Gurbakh Singh Nahang. And his Shahidi is very famously described in quite a lot of detail in Bhai Ratan Singh Pangu's Sri Guru Panth Prakash. Baba Deep Singh was an exemplary warrior who fought in many of the important battles of the 1700s. So Bhai Mani Singh doesn't fight in any battles in the 1700s. He was far too old by that time. But Baba Deep Singh was much younger. He was fighting in battles at that time. And we have weapons of Baba Deep Singh's. There's some that are kept at Damdama Sahib and some that are kept at Akal Takht Sahib and maybe a few other places as well. These are two khandas. One of them is a khanda that goes in the Damalla. One of them goes in the Kamarkasa. One is a small kirpan that goes in the Kamarkasa, then a bigger kirpan, and then a peshkab, which is a sort of weapon to go through armor. That is one of Baba Deep Singh's weapons there at Akal Takht Sahib, and then his pistol on the left-hand side. So these weapons are still there at Akal Takht. They're on the Takht itself, and you can do darshan of them every day after Dera Sahib if you go to Akal Takht Sahib. They show you all of the weapons of the Gursikhs whose weapons are there, and Gurus, sorry. So the Panth was constantly organizing and reorganizing in the 1700s, and the Sarbat Khalsa allowed for this. We weren't stuck. We weren't like, this is the way it is, and we can't move from that. Instead, there was a lot of flexibility, and things were changed as time went on. So at one point in history, they said, let's split up the Panth into two forces. Anyone older than 35 is in the Buddha Dal. Anyone younger than 35 is in the Tarna Dal. The Tarna Dal is itself split into 5 smaller jathe, and one of the jathe is led by Baba Deep Singh. And it was at, all the jathe are stationed at one of the sarovars of Amritsar, and Baba Deep Singh is stationed at Amritsar Sarovar, the main sarovar, the Harmandir Sahib Sarovar. Later on, when the Dal system didn't make sense anymore, the Tarna Dal and Buddha Dal system didn't make sense anymore, they reorganized the Panth into the missals, into the 11 missals, and Baba Deep Singh was made one of the missal dars, one of the leaders of the missals. And the name of Baba Deep Singh's missal was known as the Shahid Danda missal. The first head of the missal was Baba Deep Singh. The second head of the missal was Baba Gurbakh Singh, this who we looked at a minute ago. In 1757, let me just double check the date. I am now blanking. Yes, 1757, sorry. In 1757, the Afghanis, who were constantly invading South Asia through Punjab and would come into conflict with Sikhs many times, especially because Sikhs would loot the Afghanis and redistribute the money that they had stolen to the poor, and they would free the slaves that the Afghanis were taking back to the slave markets of Kabul. And so because of this, the Afghanis and the Sikhs had a lot of conflict. And one of the things that Ahmad Shah Abdali in his head, he thought that these people live in jungles. They don't have proper food. They don't have proper weapons. They don't have proper guns. Somehow they keep causing me problems and they keep beating me again and again. They must get their power from some special source. And so he assumed that they got their power from Harmandir Sahib. And so that is why he targeted Harmandir Sahib so much and destroyed the Sarovar and destroyed Harmandir Sahib twice and destroyed Akal Takht Sahib again and again. And in 1757, he destroyed and took over Harmandir Sahib one more time, and Baba Deep Singh was at Damdama Sahib, and he heard about this. He heard about this, and he came, and he was just shocked that no Sikhs had tried to free Harmandir Sahib, and that no Sikhs had tried to liberate Harmandir Sahib and teach the Afghanis a lesson and free Harmandir Sahib and the Darbar Sahib complex from the Afghanis. So immediately with his few students, he started to march from Damdama Sahib up towards Amritsar. He marched for 180 kilometers. 180 kilometers. Google Maps told me that that is a 37-hour walk. And they marched all the way up to Amritsar, and they came close to Tarn Taran Sahib. And when they got to Tarn Taran Sahib, and by the time, they got to Tarn Taran Sahib, as they had been marching, singing Shabads, doing Kirtan, getting ready for battle, as they marched through these villages, going from Malwa into Majha, all of the Sikh Sangat in the villages on the way, people started to jump out and volunteer to fight with Baba Deep Singh. So he didn't have a proper army. He didn't have the whole Khalsa Dal. The Khalsa army was in a different place at that time. These were regular Pindu folks who just wanted to take part and free Darbar Sahib. And they started to march along with Baba Deep Singh. Many of them didn't have proper weapons. They just had barshid. They didn't have a proper talwara even. But they started to march behind Baba Deep Singh. And when they reached outside of Tarn Taran Sahib, about 15 kilometers from Amritsar, Baba Deep Singh drew a line in the sand and he said the Shabad, Joto Prem Kalanka Chao Sir Tar Tali Gali Meri Aao. Said, if you are ready to die today, because this battle is not going to be an easy one, we are outnumbered. They were outnumbered. There were about 30 to 40,000 Afghanis, and by the time they reached Tarn Taran Sahib, there were about 5,000 Sikhs who were not proper soldiers either. And these 5,000 Sikhs, Baba Deep Singh said to them, if you're ready to die today, if you're ready to give your head for the Khalsa Panth today, then cross over this line. And he drew a line in the sand. And then everyone crossed over the line and they continued to march with Baba Deep Singh. Now, Baba Deep Singh Shahidi becomes somewhat controversial in modern times because people are uncomfortable sometimes with some aspects of it. The reality is that the oldest accounts of Baba Deep Singh Shahidi state that his head was severed from his body and he walked without his head. The oldest accounts. And we have historical gurdwaras that point to this as well. However, if you don't want to believe it, and if you want to believe that it was just a really bad injury to his neck or something of that nature, that's okay too. We are a small panth. We don't need to argue about these issues. We don't need to argue about issues like this. Whether you believe that the cease was taken off or not, that's not an issue. What's important is Baba Deep Singh's commitment that he made an ardas at Damdama Sahib that I won't stop until I get to Harmandir Sahib, and that he didn't stop until he got to Harmandir Sahib. So if you don't want to believe in that part of the Sakhi, you don't have to, but I'm going to tell the Sakhi as it's told universally in Sikh history, in accounts very soon after this, within 20 years of this event, accounts were written that described what happened with Baba Deep Singh. So I'm not sure how a legend could be created that quickly. By my own estimation, that seems like a very difficult task. But according to the accounts, about 6 kilometers after Tarn Taran Sahib, the battle started. 6 kilometers after that, Baba Deep Singh's cease was removed from his body, and Baba Deep Singh continued to fight for about 5 kilometers until he reached the outskirts of Amritsar near Chativind Gate. And from there, according to Sikh tradition, and again, you don't have to believe it if you don't want to, but according to Sikh tradition, he threw his cease and it landed on the Parikrama of Harmandir Sahib, thus fulfilling his promise. Though Baba Deep Singh was Shahid, the Khalsa Panth was victorious that day. The Afghanis ran away. The Khalsa Panth took over the Darbar Sahib complex and fixed it and cleaned it after the sacrilege that the Afghanis had done. So the battle was a success. It was Khalsa Panth de Fateh. But Baba Deep Singh, of course, gave his head for that Fateh, for that victory. I don't see any questions yet. So because there's no questions, I'm going to continue with the presentation. If questions come in, then we can stop the presentation. These parts of the presentation are just extra information that I wanted to add in. These are the Gurdwara associated with Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh. This is Bhai Mani Singh's Gurdwara, Shahid Ganj Bhai Mani Singh. It's inside Masti Gate behind the Lahore Fort. It has today been encroached upon by other buildings. It is in poor condition, unfortunately. But the Shahid Ganj is still there to this day. And that's where Bhai Mani Singh was Shahid. That's where he was Band Katai. Baba Deep Singh's Burj, his tower where he lived for all those years, is on the building to the left at Damdama Sahib. This is Damdama Sahib to the right. And on the left is the Burj Baba Deep Singh. And that's where he did Ardas to Guru Granth Sahib Ji, saying that he would not stop. On the left-hand side is Lakir Sahib, where he drew the line in the sand. On the middle is Lalkar Sahib, where the battle started with the Afghanis. And on the right is Talla Sahib, where Baba Deep Singh's cease was cut off from his head. On the left is Baba Deep Singh's Gurdwara on the Parikrama, the one that we see in the Parikrama, the small Gurdwara. You can walk up the stairs there and do darshan of Guru Granth Sahib Ji there. A lot of people don't realize that. And that's where Baba Deep Singh's cease fell on the Parikrama, according to Sikh tradition. And on the right is where he threw the cease from. It's Shahid Ganj Baba Deep Singh. The Gurdwara is commonly known as Shahida. And it is a very popular Gurdwara with regular Amritsari people. So regular Amritsaris will go to Shahida more often than they will go to Darbar Sahib. Yes, someone just asked a question. According to Sikh tradition, there were about 5,000 people who had joined him by the end. And they were not professional soldiers, but 5,000 had joined. And the Afghanis were 30 to 40,000. Okay. So somebody has a question here about the missiles and the dulls. There are no missiles alive today. All the missiles were subsumed by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who took over the missiles. The Kapoor Thalia missile of Nawab Kapoor Singh stayed separate and became the Royal House of Kapurthala. There's still a Raja out there of Kapurthala. And the Fulkian missile became the Patiale Raje. And so they are still out there as well. You know, Captain Amrinder Singh is the head of that. I guess technically he would be the head of the Fulkian missile, if we're going to go by that. But when the Dals were reorganized, they were not kept in categories. They were split up into different missiles. Because what happened was that over time, the jathas grew bigger and bigger. Instead of 5 jathas of the Tarnadal, there ended up being almost 60 jathas after a few years. And so then those jathas were organized under a few main misaldars, a few top leaders. And those misaldars were then in charge of different areas, different territories. So there were 11 missiles. The 12th missile was the Fulkiya missile, which was Patiala Naba Jind, and they were not technically a part of the Khalsa Panth. They would do their own thing. Now, one of the most interesting things about Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh is that they created a school of thought, and this school is often called Sampradai, the Pai Pranali, the Nirmala Taksal, the Taksal lineage. There's many different names for it, but there are lines going back all the way to Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh of people who have been taught the knowledge, the information that Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh had has been passed on generation to generation. Now, there's a few very important things to keep in mind, and I'll show you an alternate couple of documents here, is that there are many, many branches. Every time it passes from one person to the next, it branched off. It wasn't a direct line. So because there's many branches, that means that there's many people who can claim to be from this lineage. So it is not one line. It is many, many lineages that was passed on over time, and that a gyan was passed on. But that gyan can also be corrupted and changed over time, so we have to be careful. Here are some historical figures who are considered to be part of this lineage. Bhai Sant Singh, who was head Granthi of Darbar Sahib during Ranjit Singh's time. Dr. Bhai Veer Singh, Gyani Gyan Singh, the famous Nirmala scholar, and Sant Amir Singh of Satogali. All 4 of these figures are part of this lineage. They all can trace their lineage back to Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh. And of course, the most prominent lineage in the 20th century became the Pinranwale Taksal or the Mehta Chonk Taksal, and that was Baba Gurbachan Singh, Baba Kartar Singh, and Baba Jarnail Singh, Shahid Baba Jarnail Singh. So that was a very important lineage that played a real big role in 20th century Sikh history. However, be careful, because just because you are part of this lineage does not mean that automatically you are a sant or that you are something special. Bibi Jagir Kaur is also part of this lineage because she comes from the lineage before Sant. I can't remember now. Bishan Singh Muralle Wale. She is from the Bishan Singh Muralle Wale branch. And here we have the current head of the Taksal, right? So these are 2 figures that we know are government puppets that work for Badal that are not panthic figures, but they can also claim to be part of this lineage. So just being a part of the lineage doesn't mean anything. You also have to demonstrate a panthic thinking, a panthic soch, and you have to be willing to put your life on the line like Bhai Mani Singh did, like Baba Deep Singh did, like Baba Jarnail Singh did for the Khalsa Panth. Okay. We have about 5 minutes left. I'll try to answer these 2 late questions that came in. I'm so struck with how the Gurus held court. With the Akal Takht not being under our control, how can we hold court in these modern times? That's a great question. We need Akal Takht in order to exercise our sovereignty. But I think a first step is building sovereignty, thinking sovereignty principles in the diaspora, wherever Sikhs live, for each one of us to think of ourselves as a walking, talking, sovereign Khalsa, that we inhabit Khalsa sovereignty. And then when we join together, we create sovereign Khalsa spaces. We need to become familiar with the Sarbat Khalsa tradition. We need to become familiar with consensus democracy and consensus decision-making. Panthic organizations, be they Sikhri, be they WSO, be they Sikh Coalition, be they Taksal, whatever they be, they need to run themselves using Sarbat Khalsa rules, or need to be inspired by Sarbat Khalsa rules. Because we need to bring back our own traditions of how to run our Panthic institutions. If we are running our Panthic institutions according to Panthic tradition, and we are representing in our lived day-to-day life Panthic traditions, over time that will flower into the Panth. And you will see dramatic changes occur. Look at how the state of the Panth at the start of the Singh Sabha, and then just 50 years later at the Gurdwara Reform Movement, the flowering of the Panth that by Veer Singh Honi, that they were able to do just by writing about Gurbani, connecting to Gurbani, really being inspired by Gurbani. If we can create those types of connections with Guru Granth Sahib Ji and we can be sovereign, then we can really have a huge impact. So how did the Panth organize themselves after the missiles and Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Raj? So Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Raj, he organized the Panth under himself, and he was the leader, and he got rid of the Sarbat Khalsa model. This was very dangerous because when the Raja died, when Deep Singh was taken by the British, and he was taken away by the British, there was no one to hold the Panth together because there was no institution anymore. The Sarbat Khalsa had been finished, and now the Raja had been taken away. That's a very complex part of Sikh history, but essentially there was no organization. The Panth tried to organize during the Anglo-Sikh Wars. There were attempts to create Khalsa Panchayats in the Khalsa army, which were unsuccessful, unfortunately. These are getting to complex historical issues. Maybe we can do a webinar about them in the future, about what things look like after the British took over, because that's not a very well-known part of our history. That's a very important part of our history, has a huge impact on modern Sikhi. Along the lines of running the Panth, what are your thoughts on the upcoming ending 100-year agreement of SGPC and Buddha? Might be a long topic or discussion, so all good if you can't get into it. So I'm not sure about the 100-year agreement. I've never heard of that idea. I do know that when the SGPC took over Akal Takht, that the Nihang Singhs were not in favor of that, and that they tried to exercise their control over Akal Takht, and that they did, through the government, exercise control over Akal Takht in 1984. After the army took over, which was a pretty shameful thing to have done. I think that I don't agree with the idea that any one group in the Panth has a special control of Akal Takht. Akal Takht is the Takht of Akal, and we are all Akal Purkh Ki Fauj, and we all have a say in what happens at Akal Takht, the entire Khalsa Panth. If we look at some 18th century Sikh history, it was not just the Nihangs or the Akalis who had a say at Akal Takht. It was all of the missiles. It was all of the groups in the Panth. So I very much believe that we cannot just give control of our institutions to one group. Somebody here had a question about Ladivar. That's a pretty a big question. There's very good arguments for why Ladivar is not a good idea. Why Ladivar is a good idea and why Padshid was not a good idea. That is a discussion for another time. This is something that the Panth has been arguing about for 80 years, and I'm not going to be able to litigate that right now. Unfortunately, I don't have the time for that. So I think that covers most of the questions that have come in. If there are ever any more questions, feel free to reach out to me on social media, Santbir Singh, at Santbir Singh on Instagram, and I'd be happy to answer your question. And I just want us to remember, what did they live for? What did Bhai Mani Singh and Baba Deep Singh live for? They lived for Guru Granth Sahib Ji and they lived for Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. And who did they die for? They died for the Khalsa Panth. So that is something to keep in mind. They died for us. They lived for the Guru, and they gave their entire lives from a very young age. They dedicated it to the Khalsa Panth, and they were able to do amazing things with Guru Sahib's Kirpa. So thank you so much for your listening of this lecture. I really appreciate everybody who has taken time out of their day. Happy Vaisakhi to everyone. I know it's a little late, but Vaisakhi was just recently. So Vaisakhi de Vadaiyan, Khalsa Sirjana Dis de Vadaiyan. And thank you to Sikri for giving me this opportunity to give this talk. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So I'm more than excited to announce our upcoming webinar on the topic of Sikh stagecraft and civil society, presented by Manpreet Singh and Harinder Singh. Tune in to hear two great minds tackle some very hard-hitting questions about Sikhi in the modern landscape. And a big thank you goes out to Santbir Singh for today's presentation. It was truly phenomenal. And for more, or to listen or tune into more, please give Santbir Singh a follow on Instagram at Santbir Singh. This will conclude today's webinar, and please have a wonderful day. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.